Thank you very much. And my first guilty confession is I've kind of changed the title. So it's about the same thing, but I topically chose to title it when I was finishing it off this week, Passing the Makerfield Test. But more on that later. But good afternoon, and thanks so much for coming, for inviting me, and especially coming after such a hot week, both literally and in politics. And it's a real honour to be asked to deliver this lecture, not just to follow some of my education heroes and friends, the likes of Mick Waters and Estelle Morris, but to be part of keeping the memory of Fred alive. I was appointed schools minister 20 years ago without much of a background in education. I gradually became aware of Fred, a revered figure with a camera who would appear at education events and occasionally in my office and offer warm encouragement mixed with subtle guidance. We miss him hugely and could do with his sage advice in the urgent redesign job needed by our education system. Now, in the last few weeks, I've been haunted by one number. Over 1 million young people not in education, employment or training here in the United Kingdom. 1 in 8 young people in this country compared to less than 1 in 20 in the Netherlands. The Milburn Review puts the cumulative annual cost of that to our country at £125 billion, more than we spend on our entire school system each year. If those young people formed a city, it would be the third largest in Britain, larger than Leeds, larger than Glasgow, larger than Cardiff. But the cost is not the point. The point is that behind it sits 1 million individual lives. And the great waste here is not principally a waste for us as taxpayers, although that is real. It is the catastrophic waste of human talent, of potential, of hope. Now, I've spent the last 20 years working in and around education as a minister, as a chair of governors in 37 schools, and in education businesses. I remain addicted to education because of its focus on the potential of human talent. That's, I think, why we're all here, because education represents hope, renewal, and optimism. For us, I think, the fact that 7% of the British 16 to 24 cohort are deemed unfit for work is repugnant. In your class of 30, that is 2 of your pupils, and at least 1 of them unlikely to ever work. That is a failure of our welfare system, of our health system, but tragically for us, also of our education system. Now, I'm a parent. I have a son and a daughter, believe it or not, in their 30s. My daughter's going to be 38 this year. And at home, we have a 15-year-old who's just endured a week in a baking exam hall doing end-of-year tests in preparation for GCSEs next year. Not thinking or doing, but learning how to succeed in handwritten tests, skills she won't use again outside of education. Now, there's 23 years between my oldest and Coco. Yes, I am a parental retread. I see the differences in childhood now, and I see the vulnerability that all of our children have to becoming anxious, disempowered, and disengaged. In the course of my work, I meet parents at the wrong end of social media harm, of mental health crises, of just parenting in the modern world. The privileges and ambitions of the middle classes are my family's lived experience, and yet even we are worried for our children's future in health, in education, and in work. And widespread pupil disengagement should not be seen as their fault. The idea that children cannot be bothered is just offensive. The idea that they are a soft generation, snowflakes, content scrolling on their phones while the world of work passes them by, it's just not true. In survey after survey, including Alan's own survey of more than 400 NEET young people, 84% say they want a job. They want education or training. They're not refusing to participate. They are trying, often desperately, and our public services are failing them. Peter Hyman and Schwab Gamote spent months travelling the country for their brilliant report, Inside the Mind of a Young NEET. To Glasgow, Cardiff, Wrexham, Belfast, Bradford, Clacton, Newcastle, Bristol, Rhyl and Grimsby. They listened without a preconceived agenda to young carers, care leavers, young offenders, graduates, and those with mental health conditions or who are neurodivergent. What they found was not idleness. They describe a girl who'd been parcelled out to 11 sets of foster parents in 18 months, a boy bullied at school for more than a decade, a young carer living moment by moment in constant fear that her sister would take her own life. And they're doing side hustles, nail businesses from their bedrooms, making horse shelters, learning Russian on Duolingo, all incidentally hidden from their teachers. These are not the portraits of a work-shy generation. They are the signs, as Peter Hyman puts it, of neglect towards an entire generation. When the authors asked young people across the country for one word to describe their school experience, the words that came back were traumatic, stressful, boring, something to be endured rather than something to be embraced. And often, before the word even came, there was a bow of the head, a memory resurfacing, a sadness spreading across their faces like the darkest of clouds. Listen to one man describing what we politely call an isolation room. They put you in a room or a hallway by yourself, and then you're given all the work for your classes that day with no help or assistance. You'd be leaving half an hour early to get your lunch and then bring it back to the isolation room to eat it by yourself while you're still doing your work. That's just depressing. My predicted GCSEs were all A's and B's, and then just the turn of events that happened, well, they were making it difficult for me to learn. A child predicted A's and B's, eating lunch alone in a corridor, doing his classwork without help, and concluding the system was against him. Today, I want to make the case that the education system is both deeply implicated in how we got here and central to how we get out. And I want to set out 5 interconnected ideas that I believe might be able to turn the tide. But first, having painted that somewhat gloomy, I'm looking at all your depressed-looking faces, somewhat gloomy picture of the present, I'm afraid, want to dwell a little bit longer on the diagnosis, get really down deep into the trough of despair so that we can then be motivated out of it. You know, if we don't dwell on the diagnosis, if we get that wrong, the prescription will be wrong too. The last 30 years of education policy, and I have my fingerprints on some of it, have achieved a great deal thanks to committed and often excellent teaching. Overall, standards have risen, reading has improved, curriculum design has become more rigorous, and credit where credit's due, especially here in the home of the National Education Union, credit to teachers for that. And yet, the attainment gaps between children from rich and poor backgrounds remain as wide as they've ever been. The Education Policy Institute reports a 19.1-month disadvantage gap in 2024 at Key Stage 4. A child from a poor family is, in effect, the better part of 2 years of learning behind their wealthier classmates by the time they sit their GCSEs. 3 decades of reform, and that gap hasn't closed. Teacher quality is up. School leadership is of a consistently higher standard, if we believe Ofsted, then 90% of schools are good or outstanding. And yet we're not delivering for those that most need the benefit of a great education. The school system is misaligned. On Monday, the report of the inquiry into white working class educational outcomes, chaired by Estelle Morris, will be published. I was lucky enough a week or so ago to have a briefing on some of the research carried out by Public First for that report. They found, similar to what Alan Milburn and Peter Hyman found, that what these young people want from an adult life is, of course, to be happy, same as the rest of us. In these communities, like Makerfield, happiness means settling near family and friends. It means earning enough to put a roof over your head and enough for a reasonable standard of living. That's set against the reality of a school system built around the ambitions of university entrance, the ambitions of the middle classes like me. In Makerfield, a quarter of jobs, at most, are graduate jobs. Universities do not reach communities like this. Our system is set around the ambitions of the middle classes like me with an ingrained belief that social mobility is measured by access to higher education. A great many working class children look at the abstract academic learning in the curriculum and conclude, perfectly rationally, that it is irrelevant to the life they actually want to live. And the data on university increasingly backs their instinct. The application rate is falling. An Institute for Fiscal Studies research finds that state-educated men from poor families get a gross return at age 30 of only around 6% from a degree, set against a student loan interest rate currently running at 6.2%. For these young men, the sums simply don't add up. And what does the system become? It's become content-heavy, over-examined, insufficiently engaging for too many learners. It crowds out the performing arts, applied learning, curriculum breadth. 11 to 16-year-olds are funneled towards academic GCSEs, while other qualifications are quietly regarded as being for failures and problem children. There's too much teaching to the test, too little teaching of how to think, create, and apply knowledge. And there is next to nothing to prepare a young person for vocational and technical options at 16. I mentioned the Netherlands earlier. Their productivity rate in the economy is 22% higher than the UK. Their welfare system is devolved to municipalities, and young people only receive benefits if they are in work or training, and the municipalities in return have to offer a work-study option that is credible for them. Most 15 to 26-year-olds in that country combine part-time work with study, and their youth employment rate is over 75% compared to just over 50% in this country. And for education, it is striking that over 2/3 of upper secondary students are enrolled in vocational and technical programs. In the UK, it is half that rate. The risk of becoming NEET in the UK begins early and it builds. Children who are not school ready at 4 or 5 are nearly 3 times as likely to be NEET at 16 or 17. Persistent absence, which has risen by more than 70% since the pandemic, makes a young person nearly 4 times more likely to end up NEET. The signals are visible for years. Poor school readiness, persistent absence, low attainment, special educational needs and disabilities, family adversity, poor mental health. All of these are recorded. They're measured. And then too often, nobody acts. Why are these not baked into our accountability system, rather than the narrow EBAC and Progress 8 measures? Of course, this is not just about education. 7% of 16 to 24-year-olds are deemed unfit for work, as I've said. In a teacher's class of 30, that's 2 children who are so far from the labour market they don't even need to sign on. For most of them, this is a result of mental health difficulties, and for most, their chances of then working are slim. They are stuck. And then there's the cruelty of the labour market they're trying to enter. The bottom rungs of the ladder have been kicked away. Entry-level roles have thinned. Apprenticeship starts for young people have fallen by over 40%. Recruitment has become remote, automated, algorithmic, screened by a portal and a recorded interview before anyone looks the young person in the eye. Hundreds of applications and nothing heard back. Now, I've deliberately spent time on the problem, taken you into this dark place. Not to depress you, but to give context and impetus. So forgive me for adding just one final piece into the picture of artificial intelligence. It sharpens every line. UK evidence already shows that firms with high AI exposure are cutting junior roles and posting fewer vacancies. The entry routes into stable work, the very routes that have always been the mechanism by which disadvantaged young people gain a foothold, are narrowing further and faster. Those who leave education without strong qualifications, adaptable skills, or the confidence to keep learning will pay the highest price. AI is set, as things stand, to accelerate inequality, and an education system that already produces large and persistent gaps is increasingly not fit for purpose. That's the future we're being asked to accept, and I don't accept it. And change is urgent, not only for these young people, but to give their parents and their grandparents something that they've largely lost: hope. So let me turn to what we should do. And in this, we need to be more revolutionary than evolutionary. Now, I know that the profession is fed up with change, and I believe that, however, that, as shown in COVID, teachers can change quickly if the problem is clear. I believe that teachers want a school system that delivers for every child, that delivers belonging, rather than one that crams those that are capable of passing academic tests. So I suggest 5 interconnected changes with learner and local choice at their heart. First, and the most central structural reform, should be to end the national curriculum at 14 and to replace the fragmented landscape of Key Stage 4 and post-16 Key Stage 5 with a single 14 to 19 phase. The early phase of school is broadly working, now supplemented by a welcome new emphasis on oracy. After that focus on core social literacy and numeracy skills, it's right that children should then learn a good framework of academic knowledge up to the age of 14. This is good for cognitive development, and it helps them make sense of the world and informs everything that they learn later. But from 14, we should free young people to have more agency over their learning and to find their learning passions. Every young person should continue to study a common core, probably English, maths, digital literacy, citizenship. But beyond that core, the system should create much more room for depth, breadth, and relevance. This reformed phase should offer a genuine mix of academic, technical, and applied pathways with strong elements of project-based work. And here the evidence is encouraging. A 2019 meta-analysis by Chen and Yang in the Educational Research Review, drawing together studies across multiple countries, found that project-based learning has a medium to large positive effect on academic achievement compared with traditional instruction. And the effect was strongest in the social sciences and at secondary. Crucially for our purposes, a multi-year US study by Cregan found that project-based learning measurably improved the attendance of economically disadvantaged students. And attendance, as we've seen, is one of the strongest predictors of whether a young person ends up NEET. Relevance is not the enemy of rigor. For many young people, it's the precondition of it. A significantly slimmed down national curriculum, up to 14, should also free up time for local curriculum components, developed in partnership with employers, civic institutions, and combined authorities. Imagine aligning what young people learn with the local industrial strategy so that learning becomes visibly relevant and delivers the skills a community actually needs for social mobility close to home. For disadvantaged communities, this allows education to be embedded in their own regeneration, social mobility at a community level, if you like. For their young people, it offers the relevance that they're calling for. The arts, sport, design, enterprise, and community-based learning should recover their status alongside the academic core. These are not peripheral extras. They develop practice, perseverance, communication, teamwork, and creativity, precisely the attributes that employers consistently say they need, and precisely the ones the current curriculum effectively squeezes out. And these curriculum changes must then be reflected in the accountability system. We should replace Progress 8 with measures that focus far more on long-term destinations for individual young people and explicitly on lowering the risk of becoming NEET. As Milburn rightly observes, a school is currently recognised, regulated and rewarded for its exam results, not for where its students end up. If we measure only attainment, we should not be surprised that the system optimises for attainment and loses sight of the child. Second is growing teacher capacity where it matters most. The evidence here is as robust as anything in educational research. Teaching quality is the strongest school-controlled factor in pupil outcomes, and its effects are largest for disadvantaged pupils. The Sutton Trust work shows that a very effective teacher can add substantially more progress in a year than an average one, and for the most disadvantaged pupils, that difference can amount to years of learning over a school career. Closing the attainment gap therefore requires, above all, closing the teaching quality gap. Yet England faces a worsening teacher supply problem. NFER's 2025 analysis shows recruitment into initial teacher training remains weak. Vacancies are well above pre-pandemic levels, and here's the sting: schools serving the most disadvantaged communities are the most likely to rely on non-specialists and underqualified staff. So the children who most need the best teaching are the least likely to get it. That's not a marginal inefficiency. It's a structural driver of the very gap we're trying to close. The standard responses, financial incentives and retention payments targeted at schools with the greatest need, should absolutely be used, but they're not enough. We need new thinking to expand the capacity of good teaching itself. So let me float an idea being trialled in further education: teacher reservists. There are, remarkably, more qualified teachers not in the classroom than there are working in our classrooms. With employers already engaged in local curriculum components, as I've advocated in my first recommendation, we should work with them to release staff on a temporary or part-time basis to work alongside teachers, much as we do for armed forces reservists. Their additional capacity could hugely enhance the delivery of the relevant project-based localised learning that I'm talking about. It can make a more vocational and technical local curriculum deliverable. And there is a double dividend. A teaching reserve connects schools to the world of work, showing learners the relevance of what they study, and as more of us spend time in schools, raising the visibility and the status of the teaching profession itself. Other measures should include longer school days to create room for tutoring, enrichment and supervised study without compressing the curriculum. Expert teachers should be deployed more strategically across clusters of schools, mentoring colleagues, sharing curriculum expertise. And then technology should be used not to replace teachers, but to extend their reach. AI can reduce the planning and marking burden, surface misconceptions quickly. It can personalise practice and enable high-quality remote teaching across institutions. The principle is straightforward. Concentrate the system's best human capacity where the need is greatest and use technology to spread that further. Third thought is around learner empowerment. Curriculum and pedagogic reform, I don't believe, is enough on its own, because many adolescents disengage not for want of ability, but for want of ownership over their own learning. And I want to here draw on an excellent recent book published last year, The Disengaged Teen, by my friend the journalist Jenny Anderson and a colleague who heads the Centre for Universal Education at the Brookings Institute in Washington, D.C., Rebecca Winthrop. Based on 5 years' research into why children lose their love of learning, they identify 4 modes in which students show up in lessons and probably to lectures. And the framework is genuinely illuminating. They map these modes against 2 axes: engagement and agency. The passenger, and most of us spend most of our time as passengers, we coast We do the bare minimum. We do just enough not to get noticed. The resistor struggles with feelings of inadequacy or invisibility and does something about it by skipping lessons, by ignoring homework, by acting up. These are the children we too readily label problem children. To be fair, they're at least doing something about being bored, even if it's not what we want. They assert their own agency. The achiever does the work, gets the grade, they know how to play the game. This is fine until the rules change and they're asked to think for themselves. This exposes their lack of agency, their fear of failure, and is a real risk to their mental health. And then there's the explorer, the young person who digs in, is curious, asks questions about what they're curious about, and sets their own goals and adapts as they go. They're annoying to teach because they keep asking questions and they slow down the teacher in getting through the content of their lovingly crafted lesson plan that they need in order to get through the bulk of content of the curriculum. Explore is the mode in which young people learn best. It's high agency, it's high engagement, and it's the mode we should want every child to spend some time in every week, because the evidence shows if you spend a little bit of time every week as an explorer, it helps all of your learning across the rest of the week. And two other findings from their work should stop us in our tracks. First, engagement collapses as children move through school. In year 3, around 75% of children are engaged in learning. By year 10, only a quarter say that they love school. And secondly, parents are largely in the dark about that. While only a quarter of those year 10s love school, 65% of their parents believe their children do. Disengagement is hard to see, precisely because so much of it hides behind compliance and good grades. Now hold that framework against the testimony and inside the mind of a young NEET that I talked about earlier. Those young people looking back at school are describing exactly the same thing. The achiever predicted A's and B's, quietly drowning. The resistor, bullied for a decade, written off as a problem child. The passengers coasting through a curriculum they could see no point in. Anderson and Winthrop argue we are moving from an age of achievement to an age of agency, that a young person's success will increasingly be judged, not by their grades, but by their ability to set goals and adapt. Our system is still optimized almost entirely for the achiever, and in doing so, it's failing the resistor, it's ignoring the passenger, it's disempowering the achiever, and choking the time for the explorer mode. So in delivering the reformed 14 to 19 phase I'm arguing for, schools must create far more opportunities for meaningful choice, structured self-reflection, collaborative inquiry, and deliberate self-regulation. And to be clear, this is not a charter for softness. These approaches need rigor, and they help young people build the resilience that comes only from overcoming genuine struggle, fundamental to learning. They build the metacognitive and socio-emotional capacities that the evidence shows independently predict both academic attainment and positive later life outcomes. The evidence here is really strong. The Education Endowment Foundation rates metacognition and self-regulation as one of the highest impact, lowest costed approaches that we have, worth, on its updated 2025 figures, around 8 months additional progress for disadvantaged pupils specifically. The EEF also notes something important. Disadvantaged pupils are less likely to use these strategies unless they are explicitly taught them. In other words, teaching young people how to plan, monitor, and direct their own learning is not a frill. It is one of the most direct levers we have for closing the gap. Now, alongside agency and resilience, learners also need discernment. The curriculum has always sought to nurture the capacity to make critical judgments about the arts, humanities, scientific inquiry. But the use of generative AI takes the need for media literacy and critical thinking to an entirely new level. Think of the curiosity to look at that wonderful latest Banksy outside the Athenaeum Club, or at your own news feed, and ask, well, why now? Why here? Well, who's this for? What's the intent behind it? Discernment has never been more essential at a moment when fake content challenges the very foundations of knowledge, of truth, and of democracy. Fourth, lifelong learning. The school system cannot do this work alone. A fair education system must also provide second chances, because school attainment should not permanently determine a person's life chances. Adults need a system that supports repeated re-entry to learning as their careers change, not a residual adult skills offer tacked on to a structure designed for the young. We're all living longer. Look at this. A 50-year working life will become the norm. No one's worked out a pension system that can allow us to all retire at 50 and live to 90. It just doesn't work. A 50-year working life will become the norm, accompanied by constant de-skilling and reskilling. The starting point has to be to abandon the old stage model of our thinking about the education ecosystem of you do education, then you work, then you retire, and accept that learning and earning must now interweave throughout our lives. Universities must become institutions people return to across those lives, not one-off destinations financed by front-loaded debt. And they need to be relevant to working class communities, serving the economy and the locality, not only configured around generating more academic research. This week I met with Arizona State University, who are opening a London campus later this year. 30% of their 150,000 undergraduates are on low-income grants. They explicitly look for how to include poorer students rather than how to select to be elite. They have, for example, a partnership with Starbucks in the US so that any employee of Starbucks can have their undergraduate degree at Arizona State paid for by their employer. Living the barista to the barrister dream. In the UK, the lifelong learning entitlement is a promising foundation, but it remains too restrictive. A stronger system would recognise micro-credentials and short courses, make it far easier to accumulate and combine learning from multiple providers over time, and extend the entitlement to over 60s. And the evidence for investing here is compelling, not only economic. Adults who gain a level 3 qualification, as you know, the equivalent to A-level, see on average around a 10% increase in earnings and are more likely to be in work. And then the DFE-funded Community Learning Mental Health Study, run by Ipsos, found that 52% of adult learners with clinically significant symptoms of anxiety or depression recovered, a recovery rate comparable to, and in some comparisons better than, formal NHS talking therapies, and at a fraction of the cost. Learning, it turns out, is not only a route to a job, it's a route to mental health, to purpose, to connection. And there's even evidence that continued learning builds a cognitive reserve that may delay the onset of dementia. Congratulations on coming to a lecture. FE colleges should anchor this system locally, acting as community platforms that link employers, universities, family learning, and adult skills. And we must be honest that participation in adult learning is deeply unequal. Those in weaker local economies, older adults, and people out of work are far less likely to take part. And without deliberate intervention, AI will widen that divide as confident, qualified workers keep reskilling, whilst those most at risk of displacement are the least occupied to respond. And finally, lifelong learning must be broader than employability alone. The most durable human capacities in an AI economy, empathy, ethical reasoning, communication, and adaptability, are cultivated by the arts and humanities every bit as much by technical subjects. An education system that narrows to skills alone will produce people less equipped to navigate the human dimension of technological change, not more. And then my final recommendation is a fundamental shift in how we record and recognise achievement. Traditional qualifications rest on final grades that are at best a crude summary of capability, accurate only to within plus or minus a grade. A paper grade tells an employer or an admissions tutor almost nothing about which parts of a subject a learner has mastered, what extended work they've produced, or how they've grown over time. It is a single, blunt number standing in for a whole human being. It's a little bit like the old single-word judgments of schools by Ofsted. Digital portfolios offer a far richer alternative. They can hold varied records of modules studied, extended projects, coursework, technical competencies, workplace experiences, achievements on the sports field, on the theatre stage, and reflections on learning, accumulated across school, college, higher education, Duke of Edinburgh's Scouts and Guides, and work. And they travel with the learner for life. They make room for the genuine diversity of people's learning pathways. Admissions tutors or their AI tools could examine evidence of disciplinary curiosity, of patterns of improvement, of real project outcomes rather than relying on grades alone. Employers could replace the thin CV with a trusted machine-readable record of what a person has actually achieved and can demonstrably do. And this matters acutely for the young people I began with. Remember the care leaver Peter Hyman met, whose CV read to every employer as a story of unreliability, a string of jobs, each lasting a few months. And the real story was a series of foster placements in different locations that she had no control over. Or the young carer turned down for a paid care role because her years of looking after a blind father, a deaf mother, and a grandfather and a sister did not appear on her CV in the form that employers recognise. The current system is blind to exactly the resilience, the skills, and the lived competence these young people have built. A portfolio that captured it could change the conversation entirely. And this is fundamentally a social justice argument. Better off young people already accumulate informal portfolios of advantage. Certainly my 2 daughters and my son have done that. Through networks, through coaching, through polished applications, the well-connected parent who can secure the work experience placement. A universal digital portfolio system would make achievement visible and portable for everyone, supporting fairer admissions, better labour market matching, and a far more realistic architecture for lifelong learning. So let me finish by drawing the threads together. The attainment gaps that endure in our schools are a huge part of our repugnant NEET problem. England cannot narrow its attainment gaps with a model designed for a different economy and a different age. The country needs more than racing through an overloaded curriculum towards a set of blunt grades. It needs an education system that keeps more young people engaged, that puts stronger teaching where it's needed most, that creates credible academic and applied pathways from 14, and gives adults repeated chance to reskill and begin again. And it must be a system that aligns with the economic and social regeneration of the places where young people actually live. Milburn's verdict on the wider machinery is stark, and I share it. Britain has institutions for young people, but it does not have a participation system. The labour market does not provide enough early entry opportunities. The education system produces qualifications, but does not guarantee transitions. The health system is configured for treatment, not participation. The welfare system replaces income, but does not build pathways. No single one of these can be fixed in isolation. The architecture is the problem. The 5 ideas I've set out today will not on their own fix all of that, but they go to the educational roots of disengagement before those roots harden into welfare and health costs of detachment that we're currently paying over and over at the back end. a coherent, localised curriculum, more teacher capacity, more learner agency, more opportunities for adults, and a new portfolio system of recognition. To do nothing, or to do too little, is to consign the young people who most need the benefit of education to a bleak future of poor economic and poor health outcomes. We have, in the language of safeguarding, failed to safeguard their future. We let the tide go out and stranded a generation. But the prize, if we act, is enormous. It's not only smaller attainment gaps at school, it's a more productive economy. It's fewer young people drawing on long-term benefits and more contributing to the common purse. It is a less alienated, more cohesive society. It's a generation far better equipped to exercise judgment, to adapt to change, and to shape their own local future, rather than simply being shaped by forces beyond their control. These young people have not given up on work or on learning or on a decent life. The least we owe them is that we do not give up on them. Let us stop running exam factories. Let us start instead to deliver hope. Thank you.